on the perfection of wisdom. And again, it will come later, but also we also have to just to remind, you know, the teachings on emptiness, and wisdom realizing emptiness, even though sometimes they might be a little bit not as easy and complicating, but because it's not so easy subject and complicating, therefore we have to hear again and again. You know, the more you hear, the more it begins to make sense with the time. The more you hear, the more you read, the more you contemplate, then slowly you begin to make a little bit sense of it. And if we kind of leave it away because it's difficult, and then it always will become difficult. And so therefore then we'll not be able to really understand. But understanding and having the wisdom realizing the emptiness is so crucial. As I said at the very beginning of motivations, you know, because none of us, none of sentient beings want suffering, and we want happiness. Despite not wanting suffering, we continue to experience sufferings. And because of, you know, why we continue to experience suffering, you know, it's because of our own unsubdued mind, you know, due to our own mental state, you know, due to our mind and mental state being influenced and controlled by the defilement, the delusions, you know, such as anger, you know, strong craving or attachments, you know, sense of arrogant, jealousies, and so forth, and ignorance, you know, and all of those delusions arises because of the very fundamental ignorance. And in order to reduce and overcome that fundamental ignorance, it's must to have the wisdom that realizes the emptiness, the ultimate reality, or the ultimate nature of self and phenomena, you know. And so therefore it's crucial to destroy and overcome the very root of all those delusions, which are the very cause of our pain and sufferings. So, and you know, in some especially the text we are going to study now, because there is a lot of question and answer or kind of debate between different schools of thoughts, between non-Buddhists and Buddhists, and between different Buddhist schools. And so sometimes it can be a little bit complicating at the very beginning, but once it comes to the presentations of the Madhyamika view itself, then it will be less complicating, you know. But at the very beginning, there is some kind of cautioning and back and forth. So that can be sometimes a little bit kind of complicating. But yeah, but also when you come to the point where after all of that, then, you know, Shantideva tried to explain from the middle way school point of view, and And also, as mentioned at the very beginning, the reason to kind of have those discussions is so that we can have more correct and more subtle understanding of that, dependent arising on the emptiness, the more subtle level of that. Otherwise, even if we have some understanding, it might be gross level of understanding and not more subtle, and when we have just gross level of the understanding, then that wisdom that comes through that gross understanding can only be effective to the gross ignorance, but not the subtle ignorance, the innate cannot act as an antidote. So therefore it's important to understand that. And so, yeah, I guess, did we finish the verse number 16 before last week?
Yes, we did. We're on 17 today.
Yeah. So again, as I mentioned before, for many of the other Buddhist schools, for them, if the things does not exist from its own side or inherently, then they find very difficult to proceed or establish it as an existence, and when the middle way school refute that things does not exist, when they refute the idea of thing existing inherently or truly, or then the other schools not being able to differentiate, not being able to make a distinction between inherently existing and existence, and that is the problem. And same here also, again, mind-only school is again having that problem, and due to that, that is where a lot of cautions arises, because the middle schools refute, as I mentioned, I think last week, the mind-only school, says there are no external objects that arises from its own side without depending on the mind. So the external objects are an aspect of a mind, projection of the mind. So therefore, those external things does not truly exist. But what they said, the mind, the subject which perceives the object, exists truly, And so that is being refuted by the middle way school. The middle way school says not only the external objects, the object of the mind, the subject, not only they are empty of truly existing, but the subject, the mind which is perceiving the object, that mind also is empty of truly and inherent existence. And therefore, even though it is truly empty of truly inherent existence, but to our mind, it appears as truly existent, inherent existence. And therefore, those external objects as the internal of the subject, the mind, both are like illusions. And so that is where then the comes, if the mind itself is an illusions, as you said, then for them, if it is like illusions, If it's not truly existent, then that means it does not exist. And so if it does not exist, the mind does not exist. If the mind does not exist, the subject, the mind does not exist, then what is perceived by what? So then the question comes, then if the mind does not exist, what is the object being perceived by? There is no mind to perceive that. So what is the object that is perceived by the mind? And how can that object be perceived? Because there is no subject, the mind. And so that question arises for them due to not totally understanding, not being able to distinguish between non-existent or truly or inherently and non-existence, So that is where question arises. And so there, the Madhyamika, the middle way schools answer, the protector of the world, so referring to the Buddha, So in one of the sutra, Buddha have stated, world stated that mind does not perceive the mind, So then it is, So then he's in terms of the quotations, through the quotation of Buddha, so that is how it is refuted, how, so again, just as a sword cannot cut itself, so it is the mind. So it is with the mind. So here I think the discussions comes here. In all the Buddhist schools, there is a general understanding. If any object to be established as something as existence, how can you establish something existence? Okay. In order to establish something as existent, then there need to be a valid cognitions that precede the objects. If there is a valid cognition that precedes the object, then you can establish that object as existent. If there is no valid cognitions, then you cannot establish anything to exist, establish as existence. And so now, when it comes to that, then we can say the book exists because there is a valid cognition, there's I consciousness, valid cognition which precedes the book. So therefore, we can establish or proceed this to be book to be existence. So the next question comes: how can you establish that consciousness, that the sense consciousness, I consciousness that perceive the book, that consciousness to exist? Do you get it? No, we establish the book exists because there is consciousness which perceive the book. What about that consciousness? How can you establish that consciousness itself exists? And so then there is, then when it comes to that, then there is a different view, because such as mind only schools says, so the book has been established as existent because there is a consciousness such as I consciousness that perceive, valid cognition that perceive the book. So how can we establish that consciousness exists? And then we need another consciousness that perceive that consciousness. Valid cognition will perceive that consciousness. Then how can you prove that consciousness exists? And then again then they think it will be endless. Then it becomes endless. So since it's going to be endless, it doesn't make a sense And so therefore, they come with this idea, such as Mind Holy School, they come with this idea, while the consciousness is perceiving the book, at the same time, the consciousness also cognize or perceive itself. Do you get it? So while the consciousness is perceiving the object, also the consciousness is perceiving itself. You don't need another consciousness to perceive it. Otherwise, it becomes endless. And so therefore, in order to kind of clear that, then they come with this idea, what they call self-cognizer, that can, while it perceives the external object, at the same time, the mind is able to perceive itself or know itself. And so that is where now the debate comes. And so that is, and so the Madhyamika, the middle school refute that ideas of the self-cognizers. And so that is where it is saying the mind does not perceive the mind. So it's saying the mind cannot cognize by itself. Okay, just as the sword cannot cut itself. So no matter how sharp the sword is, it can cut something else, but it cannot cut itself. In the same way, the consciousness can perceive other objects, but it cannot perceive itself. Just like the sword. And so therefore, your idea that there is such as known as self-cognizers, which cognize or know itself. So then it doesn't make sense. Otherwise, the sword will be able to cut itself. It will be similar. So that is the argument. So in terms of the mind, there are two types of mind. Other cognizers, which means the mind cognizing other objects. Whether it is external object or whether another mind perceiving another mind. And then there is, especially in in a Mind Holy School, then they have this idea of self-cognizer, which the mind, not other mind, but the mind itself cognize itself. So that has been refuted. And then, so then on the 18th, the Mind Holy School come to that to answer that, to that question. It illuminates itself as does a lamp. So here it's saying though the mind can perceive itself, the mind can know itself, the mind can illuminate itself, just as the lamp is able to illuminate itself. So then here is saying, the lamp, the light of the lamp or the lamp is not only able to dispel the darkness outside, but also it is able to illuminate itself. So that is where they are now, and so therefore, since the light has these qualities or characteristics, the ability to not only illuminate and dispel the darkness outside, but also it has the ability to illuminate and light itself. In same way, the mind has same. So that is why they are now coming with that ideas. And then that has been refuted by Madhyamika. A lamp does not illuminate itself, for it is not concealed by darkness. So here is saying, while the lamp can illuminate the darkness outside. Like, let's say in a room, when you switch on the light, there was darkness before. The moment you switch on the light, then it illuminates the darkness. But you cannot say the lamp or the light illuminated itself, because when we say illuminated, it means there was darkness before, and then through the light it has been illuminated or cleared the darkness. So if you said that, then you have to say the lamp has, before there was darkness within the lamp itself, and then now it has been illuminated. If that's so, therefore, when we say illuminated or dispel the darkness, it means there's something before which, by lighting the lamp of light, then that has been kind of the darkness has overcome or illuminated. And so if you say the light illuminate itself, then that wouldn't apply, that wouldn't be possible, because if you say that, there would be a darkness within the lamp, within the light itself before, and then when you light it, then that has been illuminated. So therefore, and also the other argument make is, then in a way, then you will have to say also, darkness conceal darkness, just as light illuminate, lamp illuminate itself, the darkness conceal itself. And if that is the case, the darkness conceal itself, then you will not be able to dispel the darkness. It is like a chair that has been covered by some kind of cloth, so that is concealed by the darkness. So then again, and then 19, the minority school come with another kind of answer with another examples. A blue object does not require something else for its blueness, as does a crystal, So for example, the color of the blue, the object of the color of the blue, in order to that the blue color to appear, make it appear, for example, in a crystal, it is able to appear as a blue color through the crystal. You see the blue color through some kind of crystal, and in that cases, you are able to see the blue through that crystal, reflect through the crystal. So in that cases, it dependent on the crystal, to reflect that blueness, the blue color. But so in that cases, it dependent on another something else, such as the crystal. But like a lapis lazuli, the blue color is from the very beginning. So it doesn't have to depend on something else to reflect that the blue color, the blueness colors. Okay, and so therefore here is saying, in terms of blue color or blueness, it can reflect one by depending on others, something else, and one without depending on others by itself. And so here again, it is saying that is why again they are saying similarly there can be the mind which is able to perceive itself, which doesn't have to depend on others, and then there are others. To establish it, it has to depend on others. And giving that example at the blue one, So, and so that then in the Madhyamika again refute that, saying that is again that answer does not really answer the questions, you know. As in the case of non-blueness, blue is not regarded as its own. Of course, in terms of the white crystal, you know, there is appearance of blueness, but of course it is not regarded as its own. And what blue by itself could make itself blue, you know. So again, the Madhyamika is saying, you know, the blueness of the blue color, the blueness or color of lapis lazuli is established, you know, as soon as it comes into being, the moment the lapis lazuli is being produced or come into existence, that blueness come as soon as soon. So therefore, it is not something which previously which had not been blue, but made it blue later. Okay, so therefore it doesn't depend on others. And therefore this example is not suitable to illustrate self-illuminations or self-cognitions, you know. So yeah, and then the next, again, then the mind old school, it is said that lamp illuminate once that is, this is, once this is cognized with awareness, the mind is said to illuminate once that is cognized with what? So, you know, in that sense, you know, even though, if you said, even though the light does not illuminate by itself, but nature of the light is illuminating, you know. The nature of the light is illuminating, even though it does not illuminate itself, but nature of light is illuminating, and that can be perceived by the awareness, you know. And if you said that, then again also also that does not illuminate the self-illuminating or self-cognizing, cognizing. if you say the light, I mean the mind is illuminating, the nature of the light is illuminating, by which awareness, which is different from the mind, can it be cognized or awareness? And so therefore you cannot kind of be able to answer that, or defend. If no one perceives whether the mind is illuminated or not, then there's no point in discussing like a beauty of barren women's daughters. So when you look from ultimate point of view, of course, on conventional level, the nature of light is illuminating light. On conventional level, when you don't analyze on a ultimate level. But here, the cautions, all the discussions between the different schools is not on conventional level. They are all coming on ultimate level, The different view comes on ultimate level when they discuss on ultimate level. On conventional level, they don't have that argument, So here being that, so because it is analyzing on the on ultimate level, and so therefore, on ultimate level, if no one perceives whether the mind, or ultimate level, when you analyze what is the mind and where is the mind, mind is just a continuity of the awareness experience, and within that, is a continuity. So therefore, when we say continuity, there's a present continuity of the mind, past mind, continuity of the mind, the future continuity of mind. Is the past, the consciousness, past moment, the consciousness. It can't be, it is gone, it is no more there, you cannot pinpoint. Future is to arise, in that you cannot say that is. And the present moment, the moment you say it is gone. That very moment is gone. So you cannot really pinpoint any moment of the consciousness as being that consciousness. Let's say I consciousness perceiving the book, The first moment is not the I consciousness that's perceiving the book. Neither the second moment is the one, neither the third moment, fourth moment. Each of those moments does not have the full ability to perceive the book. So therefore, each of none of them is that. So when you do kind of analysis, you cannot, with that kind of ultimate analysis, you cannot find, and so when you cannot find the mind, then then you cannot find the mind which precedes the objects or illuminate the objects. And when you don't have that mind on ultimate level, then there is no caution about asking whether the mind is illuminating by nature or not illuminating nature, because there is no mind on ultimate level. So when there is no mind, you can't talk about mind being illuminating, non-illuminating, self-illuminating, or other illuminating, because there is no mind on ultimate level. Just like it is saying, like the beauty of barren women's daughters, the barren woman does not have a child. So when there is no child of barren woman, we cannot talk about the child being beautiful, attractive, non-attractive, not beautiful. Because the object is not there, so that we cannot talk about the contribute of that object. If there is no table, we can't talk about long table, small tables, big table, small table, long, short table, nice table, not nice table. These are all attributes of that object. When that object does not exist, we cannot talk about that. And so therefore here, the middle way school is saying, on ultimate level, when it analyzes, there's no consciousness that precedes the object. And so therefore we cannot even talk about whether it's on conventional level. Definitely we can talk about the mind being in the nature of luminous, knowing and clear or luminous, therefore illuminating nature. But on ultimate level, then there is none of that. And so that is where then in 23, again, mind release school come. If the self-recognizing or cognizing awareness does not exist, how is consciousness recalled? So again, in order to recollect or recall something, it has to be something, object that we have seen, heard, or known, something we are familiar with, something with some familiarity that we have in the past. And because of that, we have contact with that object or familiarity with that object, then that can be recollect later, and that can be remember later, So without having experienced that object before, you cannot remember or recollect later, okay? In order to recollect or remember something, any experience, you have to have experience in the past, And so therefore, when we talk about experience, or cognizing, then there is then they talk about self-cognizing and other cognizing. And so that is where it is, And then if it is others, then it will be countless, as I mentioned before. And then therefore, from the mind-only school, therefore, there's no other options. There's no other options than to accept the self-cognizing, self-cognizer, For example, we see something, or whatever it can be, let's say book or table. And then later you remember book, you can recollect the book or the table because you have experience before. And when we remember the book or table or any objects, then also at the same time we remember or we collect, oh, I saw that. I saw. You remember, I saw or I experienced. So at that moment, you recollect two things, same time. You are recollecting the object as well as recollecting, I saw it. And so therefore, you are recollecting objects as well as the subject. So they are saying, how can you recollect the subject that I saw it or I heard it, whatever that, if what you saw has not been experienced before? And so therefore, they are saying you have not only experienced the table, but you have also experienced the subject that is experiencing the table at the same time. And that is why we are able to recollect both of them. Does it make sense? Yeah, when we recollect the table, does we just recollect table, or also you can recollect that, I saw the table. You also recollect or remember the subjects that is that has experienced that. And so therefore since we remember both them, recollect them, therefore that means both of them has been experienced before, the object and subject. And therefore, how is that subject being experienced before? Is by the self-cognizer. So that is why they are saying, so if you don't have self-cognizer, then how can you say you can remember the subject? Otherwise, we can only say we recollect and remember the object, but how can we remember the subject, experience the object? And so if we remember the subject, experience the object, that means the subject has also been experienced before. And therefore, if subject has been experienced before, what experience that is that self-cognizer. And so therefore, otherwise, how can you consciously recall it? And so to that, again, you know, the middle way school answered that, you know, recollections comes from its relation to something else that has experienced, like a right poisons. So here, the middle way schools, you know, is saying that, you know, you don't have to experience in order to recollect both the object and the subject. You don't have to experience the subject before. And so here it is going, you know, for example, of course here give the example of right poisoning, but maybe we can let us use a, you know, bite by a mosquito, okay? So you have bite by the mosquito, and later maybe we happen to have a malaria. Then we remember the bite of the mosquito. By remembering the biting of the mosquito, then we remember, oh, that is where the malaria came. You know, the poisons, whatever that produced the malaria, whatever, I don't know whether you call it poison or whatever, substance that produced the malaria, you know. So that moment, then you remember, oh, that's when I had that malaria. Even the malaria or the poison has not been perceived before. When you are bitten by the mosquito, but later when you remember the bite of the mosquito, now you can recollect, oh, that is what happens, you know. And so therefore, it is able to experience because that bite of the mosquito and that malaria or the poisons has so much relationship, so much strong connection. Because of that, by remembering one, you can recollect the others because of their special connections, relationship. And so therefore, in order to remember that, you don't have to experience that before. To remember, recollect something now, it doesn't mean you already have perceived that already before. Something which are not being experienced or perceived before, you can still remember by remembering something else, and because they have the connections. And so therefore, you don't have to have that kind of self-cognizer or cognizing mind. And so that is how So I think maybe we will have a break, okay, before your mind can digest a little bit. I think there is a lot to be digested. It's like going to a science class or some kind of difficult math class that you need to give a lot of time to digest, you know. So anyways, so we'll have a break now. So I hope everyone is back.
Geshe, I have a question.
Yes.
So, if I'm meditating and my mind starts to wander, and that little corner of my mind says, "Yoo-hoo, your mind's wandering." How is that different than the mind cognizing itself?
The mind cognizing itself, I think there is similar caution which the other cautions is. I think what it means when they have this concept of self-cognized mind, it means while my eye consciousness is perceiving the book, at the same time my eye consciousness also perceiving the eye consciousness.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
But while my eye consciousness perceiving the book, if there is another mind which is conceiving my eye consciousness, then it is not a self-cognizer, it is a mind, another mind cognizing the mind.
Okay.
So, and so the other cautions I think is similar, but I'm having trouble understanding why mind cannot perceive mind. When we meditate on the quality of mind, aren't we trying to do exactly that? The examples given, the sword and lamb have no consciousness. Could you please address this? So again, just as I said, you know, we meditate on the nature of the mind, you know. So in that mind is a two different mind, you know. It is not the same mind. The object of our mind is nature of our mind is different mind, and then the mind which is meditating on that is a two separate mind. And just like there is the mind which is wandering, and at the same time there is mind which is aware of being wandering, you know. Or there is a mind which is very focused, and there is another mind which is aware of being focused, you know. So therefore, when the statement said the mind does not perceive mind, and that was actually coming from one of the sutra where Buddha gave us examples. The mind does not perceive the mind, the consciousness doesn't perceive the consciousness, just as the sword does not cut the sword, or the light does not illuminate itself. So here the Madhyamika bringing that quotations and using that to refute the idea of self-cognizers. I think it might be nice, I think, to a little bit understand why they are even discussing about that. What is the point of it? Self-cognizer, other cognizers, why? What is the even point of that? You know. But it is a very crucial point, because it is always, how can we say something exists or something does not exist? That is the way it comes. You know, how can we prove something exists or something does not exist? And it is just our mistaken. You know, something does not exist, but our mind is, due to our mistaken mind, we seem to perceive it exists, but it does not exist. So that is the way the point comes. How do we define something exists or does not exist? And that is it is a big discussions. You know, it is a big subject. How can we define something that exists or something does not exist? Can we say something exists just because it appeared to us, our mind? We cannot define something exists or something does not exist just on the basis whether something is appearing to our mind or not appearing to our mind. Because there are things which appear to our mind but just mistaken, and it does not exist. And there are things which does not appear to our mind immediately, but things could exist. And so therefore, it has always been a topic of discussions. How can we define something exists or what something that exists or something that does not exist? So that is where it all comes to. So within all the Buddhist schools, they come to the same kind of conclusions. Something can be defined as existing if there is a valid cognizance which perceive or which cognize the objects. If there is no valid cognizing mind or cognizer which perceive the mind or object, then that object cannot be defined as existence. So to that, there is no difference. Now the difference comes. So when it comes to the external objects, such as as I was given table, everyone thinks there is a mind which perceives that valid mind which perceives the table, so therefore table can be established as an existence. And they all agree same. They have no problem with that. Now the problem, how can you define, how can you prove the mind which perceives that the table, that as existence? What is the vital cognizing that perceives that mind which perceives the table? And that is where different school comes. Some school says, you know, there is another mind which perceives that I consciousness. Okay. Some of the Buddhist schools have this. Then, in order to kind of to come to a certain conclusion, understanding of that, then some schools say, oh, that I consciousness that perceives the table can be established as existence because there's another valid cognizing mind which perceives that. And to that, such as the mind-only school, as I mentioned at the beginning, then they point out there is then if you say that, then it would be endless. So they don't feel comfortable with that idea. You know, they think then it becomes endless. And when that becomes endless, then you cannot perceive that the actual object, because it keep on going back and back and back to prove something exists. And you might never be able to prove the table to exist, because you keep on trying to prove the consciousness, how that consciousness is endless. So then they come out with this idea of set cognizers, while the consciousness is able to perceive the table at the same time. You don't need another consciousness to perceive it. The conscious, the I conscious, the consciousness which is perceiving the object at the same time, it has the ability to perceive itself. And so, whereas the prasangika, the middle way school of prasangika, they say we don't need both of them. Neither it has to be endless, neither we have to come with very complicating concept of set cognizers. And they explain, you know, Because there's objects, there's subject that perceive that. Because there is subject that perceive that, there's object. By dependent arising. You can only talk about that object only if there is subject that perceive that. And you can only talk about subject only if there is an object to be perceived. And so therefore, neither you need to have a endless mind perceiving another mind, neither you need to come with this very complicating and concept of set cognizers. More simple way to do that is by mutual dependent arising. Because there is subject, there is object. Because there is object, there is subject. So that is why, so now you will come why this complicating, you know, and why middle way school, the Prasangika is saying we don't have to be so complicated.
Thank you, Geshe. That's helpful.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Geshe, I have a question.
Yes, please.
I know this probably sounds ridiculous, but now I'm a little confused because Shanti Deva's answering questions as a Madhyamika, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying the middle way is the Prasangika.
No, Madhyamika has two.
Oh.
Okay. Middle school and Madhyamika are same. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Madhyamika is Sanskrit word, and Prasangika, I mean, middle school is, of course, English translation. And within the middle way, there are two. There is Sotandrika Madhyamika and Prasangika Madhyamika.
Oh, okay.
There are two kind of subdivisions. And Prasangika is supposed to be the highest view.
Oh, okay.
So, again, so within the middle school, there are two subdivisions, and Prasangika is supposed to be the Nagarjuna's view, whereas Shantideva also followed that.
So quickly, can you just explain the tiny difference between the Prasangika Madhyamika and the other one?
Sotandrika.
Sotandrika.
Yeah. In Sotandrika, you know, they say, you know, there's nothing that exists, you know, from its own side without depending on the mind. Okay, without depending on the mind. Okay, but there is something from the object and there is something coming from mind together. That is how things exist. Sometimes that is more, I feel sometimes more comfortable with that concept. You know, there is something from the objective side, not totally without depending on mind. Then there is the mind on the from mind side, then something coming, and then that is how it exists. But the Prasangika said there is nothing that exists from its own side. And so that is therefore nothing. So the Sotandrika says that things exist by its own side or inherently, whereas the Prasangika will refute that. And the Prasangika will say nothing exists inherently and by its own power, from its own side. And so that is where it become more kind of go more deeper or more subtle, you know. Nothing exists from its own side. There's nothing exists. And for example, the Sotandrika, you know, when you analyze, even though they say there's no truly existence, they refute truly existence of anything. But that for them truly existence means which is not something that exists without depending on other mind. Totally, everything coming from the objective side, totally from objective side, without depending on the mind. So they refute that, and so therefore they say there is something from the object and something from the mind, and coming, that, and that is how things exist. For them, if nothing exists from the objective side, then they find it very difficult to proceed that it exists. When you analyze within the object, it has to find within something there. For example, when they analyze what is the person, then they go and then they find, the person within the consciousness. So they said the mental consciousness that continue from one life to another life, carrying that. Then they find the persons in that, So everything, if you go more and more deeper, then they find, you have to find within something on that, Otherwise, they cannot establish that things exist. Whereas prasangika, when you analyze, even though it cannot be found, but still it can be established as existence by merely imputations, by merely designated, by merely labeled. So you don't have to find. When you do ultimate analysis, you don't have to find within the object. If I'm looking for the book, I don't have to find with what this book is, Guides to Bodhisattva Way of Life. I don't have to find in each of those pages. Neither each of pages is that book, neither each of those sentences that, neither each of that. Even though I cannot find so-called the book of the Guides to Bodhisattva Way of Life with each of those papers, each of all of that, but still they can still establish the book, which the Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life can be established by coming of all these parts and bases coming together. That the mind, on the basis of that, the mind merely labeling or imputing that, and so therefore you don't have to find. When you do that kind of ultimate analysis, you don't have to find within the each of part, any of the part. Whereas in prasangika, it has to be found. Otherwise, you cannot establish it exists.
Oh, they don't. So they don't have to find it. They don't go that far. They don't. Okay, I'm starting to get it, because I was thinking, I was just confused that I can never remember the word. Not the prachamika, but the other one.
For their point of view, they have to find. Prasangika, they don't have to find. All the rest of the Buddhist schools of thought, except the prasangika point of view, they all have to find within its parts, within the one of the parts. Otherwise, they cannot establish it. How can they say, when you analyze and you cannot find, and how can you say it exists? They all have that same. All the Buddhist schools, except for the prasangika, they all have that. When you analyze this within the part which make the whole, whatever that phenomena, it has to find within the basis, within the parts. If you cannot find, then they say, what is the difference between non-existence and existence? Both of them, when you analyze, you cannot find non-existent object as well as you call the existence. So therefore, for them, something exists. When you analyze, it has to be found within one of the part of the basis, or in part of the basis, within the basis or part of one of the part. And so that is why they all accept, they all accept inherent existence, and existing from its own side. And it is a prasangika who says, you don't have to find. Even if you don't find, still you can establish it existing by merely imputation, by merely label. And so that is the difference.
Okay.
Okay, you just hear it. Yeah, it is just yeah. Again, as I said, those the tenets can be quite complicating. If it is so easy, I don't think all of those master will be, they're all a brilliant mind, whether it's the master from the Mind Holy School, or whether it's Madhyamika school, or whether it's Babasika, Sotandrika, or some of the non-Buddhist schools of thought before, they're all incredibly intellectual and very sharp-minded, but still they have different views and different way of understanding things differently. And so therefore, sometimes it can be a little bit complicating. And unless, again, even myself, sometimes even I get a little bit kind of confused, and trying to make sense of how they are trying to refute something, and how the other school is trying to defend, and why they defend that way, or how when they refute, how does it really, how they are able to refute and all, first of all, understanding each of their view is not so easy. And secondly, when they are trying to have these discussions and refuting and each of them, then it becomes even more complicating. Yeah. But at the same time, I think I wanted to kind of make a little bit clarity why there is this discussion going on about self-cognizer, other cognizer, why is it important, how did it comes, but it comes because of that important point, whether things exist or not, and how can we define something exists. And so that is where it comes. Okay. Again, if anyone has questions, any other questions or any others comments, please feel without any hesitations, without being shy, without being feeling it is a stupid questions. Yes, please.
Hi, it's Patty.
Yes, please, Patty.
This may have nothing to do with the discussion, but I have.
Oh yeah, nothing, no problem.
Okay, how would you stand on the quotation, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, is it sound?
Yeah, I think I have heard about that. That idea, that view, and so I think that is where it is in Buddhist point of view. From Buddhist point of view, even there is no human beings hearing the sound or falling,
right?
If there is another consciousness, whether it can be another being's consciousness, it can be Buddha's consciousness. If there is some consciousness which is perceiving that sound, then it exists. So it doesn't have to be perceived by human being's mind. As long as it has been perceived by a valid mind, valid cognizer of any beings,
okay.
then it can be established as existence. But if there is no mind at all of any beings that perceive, then it does not exist.
Thank you, Geshe.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Geshe.
Mm-hmm.
Karuna Keaton was talking about this when he came to teach.
Uh-huh.
and he gave the example of space and planets.
Uh-huh.
For some reason, it's easier for me to relate to stuff on this planet. But I was having I don't know why it's difficult, but I was having such a difficult time relating it to space. Like, I mean, I guess it makes sense what you just said. If there isn't any consciousness, which of course there's more consciousnesses that than we know, that we understand, and it's not being perceived, a planet out there or a galaxy or whatever it is, that it's not there, it's not existing. But even if it is existing, it's not inherently existing, is what you're saying. It's
from
dependent on things. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just was sort of thinking out loud because I remembered when he said that, and we were having a little discussion, and I was like, I don't know, but I think it's become a little bit clear now when you're teaching this. So thank you.
Yeah, as long as there is a consciousness that valid cognitions or valid consciousness that perceive that, then it exists, you know, even though maybe we do not, even though our mind is unable to perceive it, you know, it doesn't mean it does not exist, as long as there is another consciousness.
Okay.
Valid cognitions, yeah. Now, so then again, verse number 24, you know, I think the discussions keep on going quite a while, because once it comes to the main, it would have been more easier. Yeah, because of that, you know, in Santa Fe, actually, I kind of skip most of the discussions between the different tenets, and went into more of the presentation of middle way school itself. So here again, 24, it says, you know, again, the mind only school says, the mind, it illuminates itself, meaning again, you know, it's trying to say the mind know itself or cognize itself. It can, and because the mind endowed with other condition perceive it. So it is saying, you know, when someone has developed higher level of concentrations or shamatha, through the achievement of shamatha, on the basis of achieving the shamatha, then they can also work on others state of mind, and through that, some of them, they can achieve what we call clairvoyance of seeing others' mind, you know, the clairvoyance of reading or seeing others' mind. And someone can achieve that. Of course, they might not be able to read all the mind, but certain level of mind, you know, it's not like limitlessly that they know everything like the Buddha knows, every subtlety and all of that. But to a certain level, they can develop a clairvoyance of readings, others' mind. That kind of clairvoyance can be developed on the basis of shamatha. So here is saying, you know, with other conditions, meaning when someone has developed that shamatha, on the basis of that shamatha, if they develop that kind of clairvoyance of be able to read others' minds, so they can read other people's mind from far away. So if mind has that ability to know and read the mind of others very far away, why wouldn't be able to know itself or read itself, which is close? That is the argument. Your mind is close to yourself, other mind is far away. And if your mind has that ability to know and read other mind, then definitely the mind which is close to you, the mind also should have that ability to know itself, illuminate itself. So that is what, again, trying to come with some kind of reasoning to prove the idea of self-cognizers, the mind cognizing or knowing itself. Again, we are not talking about two different minds, same mind. Yes, that is the way it is. And so then the Madhyamika is saying, it doesn't make sense to say just because if someone has ability to see far away, that they will have ability to see the near one. It's not always like that. So example giving here, jar, seen due to the application of magical ornament is not the ornament itself. What it's saying, when someone develop through certain practice, supposedly, I don't know how true it is, but supposedly through certain practice ceremonies that you have some kind of eye lotions, and you through certain and if you kind of anoint that eye lotion to your eye, you can see what is beneath the earth, the treasures, the jar of treasures, gold, silver, whatever minerals, So that is what it is saying, So nowadays, of course, maybe we don't need that ceremony. We have technology to do that. So we don't have to waste our time to develop that ability. We just buy the technology and you can see. But supposedly there is some kind of practice ceremonies through that you can kind of consecrate that kind of the lotions, and then you anoint your eyes, and then that allow you to see that. So what he is saying with that, even though you are able to see far distant within the earth, down, much down below, but it cannot see the eye ornament itself, which is there, very close. So he is making it doesn't just because you are able to see far distant doesn't mean it will be able to see the near one. So that is how kind of refuting that idea that because it has able to see itself, which is near one, because it has ability to see far away. So that is. And 25, the manner in which something is seen, heard, and cognized is not what is refuted here, but conceptualizations of its true existence. What is the cause of suffering is rejected here. So again, so because the Madhyamika, Prasangika, says on ultimate level, when you really analyze on a deeper level, on a fundamental level, what is consciousness itself, even let's say, if we take any example or any particular consciousness, let's say example, and then we can apply to any kind of consciousness. The consciousness that precedes the table, or iPad, what is that consciousness? What is that? That consciousness has the what you call the attribute or nature or characteristic of many different things. It has the attribute or the qualities of knowing. It has the qualities of luminous, illuminating. It has the qualities of not having a shape, color, size. It has all these qualities. Within that consciousness, there are many different qualities. And it is made of many, many moments of continuity of many moments of that one moment of that consciousness perceiving the iPad or the table is made of. So when you analyze what is that icon that perceiving, is it the first moment? Is it the second moment? Is it the third moment? Is it that quality of the knowing? Is it the quality of the luminous part? Is it the quality of not being the color, shape? Is it so when you draw into that, then you cannot pinpoint. You cannot pinpoint any of them. So the eye consciousness, such as perceiving the iPad, is merely imputed on the basis of all these coming together. On the basis of that, then that is imputed that. But it cannot be found. So therefore, on ultimate level, since the consciousness cannot be found, so therefore there is no consciousness that is perceiving the consciousness. And so when that says on ultimate level, because when we do that analysis, so then again the mind-only school think then that means it does not exist. So then that means if it does not exist, then that means there's no consciousness which is eye consciousness which is seeing the objects. There's no ear consciousness which is hearing the sound. There is no nose consciousness which is smelling the taste. There is no tongue consciousness which is tasting the experience the taste. There is no bodily consciousness which is experiencing the softness, the roughness, coolness, warmness, whatever different experience. And there is no mental cognizance which cognize. And so then that is where they get the confusion. And then they say, then that means you are refuting all of those consciousness, So then they think that you are refuting all of that consciousness. And that means you don't accept those consciousness. And so here, then Mother Mika is making clear, you have misunderstood. And how is misunderstood there? Here again, he is saying, the manner in which something is seen by eye consciousness, heard by ear consciousness, and then others, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, or by mental consciousness, recognize is not what is being refuted here. So he's saying, here he's saying, I'm not saying there's no consciousness, eye consciousness, eye consciousness which is seeing the object, ear consciousness which is hearing, the nose consciousness, the tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mental consciousness. We are not refuting that, he is saying. On conventional level, on relative level, all these consciousness exist. And we are not refuting that. So here he's saying, you have misunderstood. Here he's saying, so that is not what is being refuted here. So then what is that you are refuting? So here explains, but what the middle way school or Prasangika is refuting here, but the conception is true existence, which is the cause of suffering, is rejected here. He's saying, we are not refuting the object, neither we are refuting the subjects that is perceiving the object or experience the object. But what we are refuting here is, the conceptually misperceiving object that is not in object. There is a truly existence. Even though there is no truly existing form, there's a belief there is a truly existing form. Even though there is no truly existing I consciousness which is perceiving that form, there is a belief due to the misconception of mind. There is a belief, there is a I consciousness, truly existing I consciousness that is perceiving the truly existing form. And that has been refuted. That is what is being refuted here. What is being refuted here is truly existence of the physical form, the sound, physical form as well as the consciousness that is perceiving that, the sound as well as the consciousness that is experiencing that, as well as the taste, the smell, truly existing smell, as well as truly existing consciousness that's experiencing that, and all of that. That is what is being refuted here. So here he's saying, the middle way, don't get confused what I'm refuting and what I'm not refuting. There's two things, just because when you analyze, you cannot find it, it is not refuting, it does not exist. When you do that kind of ultimate analysis, when you cannot find it, what is refuting is not truly existence. It's not refuting, it does not exist, just because you cannot find with that ultimate analysis. And for them, that is not being able to distinguish that. When you analyze and you cannot find it, then that means you are refuting that because it does not exist. And so that is where where the misconceptions, misunderstanding comes. And here, the middle ways we're clarifying that, the two different things, and what is being refuted and what is not being refuted. And why it is need to be refuted, why truly existence, form and truly existing consciousness had to be refuted, because by grasping truly existing object and truly existing subject, the mind, then other delusion arises, such as attachments, anger, and all that. And due to arising of those delusions, then suffering arises, suffering comes. And so therefore, that is why it is saying, which is the cause of suffering, because that grasping of truly existence is that fundamental ignorance that give rise to all the delusions, and which which lead to suffering state. And so that is why that is truly existing need to be refuted, so that is why it is not just kind of refuting for the sake of discussions, for the sake of argument. Here it is very much related with our experience. It's not just kind of, sometimes we have just kind of argument or discussions because we have different ideas, what we believe, what don't we believe, but sometimes it's nothing to do with our experience, We just get in some kind of argument or debate. So here he is saying, I'm not just trying to argue or debate, which is kind of not something personal or nothing to do with our experience, but it's so related with our experience. It's so related with our experience, and especially related with our suffering, and so therefore it needs to be refuted. not necessarily refute the other, but while it is directly, it seems to refute the others, but actually it's refuting your own grasping, your grasping mind. Even though it sounds like it's refuting someone else, mind all is cool. But actually when we use that, then we use to refute with our own, that grasping mind. Because our grasping mind has a similar way of thinking of the other schools. And so through that, then, okay, so we'll do the dedications. Unless someone has some questions or comments. Okay, if not, then we do the dedications.